Okay, I know why you're all here, but before we dive into everyone's favorite stop-motion kids film, we have to talk about how Coraline came into existence. I promise it's important. Neil Gaiman began to write Coraline in 1990 because of the apparent lack of horror stories made for children. This was because his daughter, at the age of around 4 or 5, would tell Gaiman horror stories, and he looked for horror stories to tell his daughter. But after finding there weren't any, he decided to take matters into his own hands and write a children's horror story. He came up with Coraline, which was 10 years in the making. As he was attempting to publish the book, many publishers thought it was too scary for children. Filled with hubris and feeling defiant of God, he let a co-worker's daughter read the book to prove it wasn't scary. After she approved the book, it was subsequently published. Thus, in 2002, Coraline hit store shelves and gained a cult following. Later, Gaiman would find out that the daughter of his co-worker was actually terrified of the book's story, but wanted to see it published because she wanted to know how it ended. This story of how a famous book came into existence is great because it would set the tone for the film adaptation of Coraline, which was released in 2009 and directed by Henry Selick. I grew up with this film, and I've also heard that this film determined what kind of life you would live in 10 years. Thought the film was scary? You're probably a nurse or an accountant or something boring like that. Love this film? You probably listen to metal or hardcore, went to metal shows, Halloween is your entire personality, and were probably seen as a school shooter just because you wore black and thought you were alternative. Am I projecting? Probably. But I will say that Coraline defined my generation's taste in film. But what about this film is so endearing and gripping? Why has this film stayed in our lexicon for so long, and why is it still popular today? For today's Halloween special, I will be revisiting Coraline in the year of our Lord 2023, analyzing its plot, characters, aesthetic, and cultural impact, as well as discussing its impact on stop-motion animation and the film industry. Now, let's get spoopy. Just a quick note before we get into this video will not be going over the story of Coraline. This is under the assumption that you have already seen the film and remember it. If not, here is the plot from Wikipedia. It's comprehensive enough to understand without needing to watch the film. This is also to save more time discussing the film without needing to recap it. Without further ado, let's dive in. Let's start by listing some facts about the titular character. Coraline is an 11-year-old girl who just moved from Pontiac, Michigan to Ashland, Oregon. Her parents are working, so they ignore her and push her aside pretty much throughout the film. As the events of the movie unfold, she is proven to be curious, brave, strong, independent, and unfazed by anything thrown at her. She is definitely not one to be easily scared. She makes a point in the middle of the movie that no one listens to her, and can definitely be considered misunderstood. All of these basic facts about her character make it easy for us, the audience, to connect with her. The target audience for this film were around the same age or older as Coraline, so if you were younger, she was someone to look up to, and if you were older, she was someone to become. Her motivations are also relatable. When you're a child, you really want nothing more than a perfect world, and anything less than that is unacceptable! Coraline believes the life she lives and the people she knows are boring and don't want anything to do with her. When this new other world comes into the picture, it's quite literally picture perfect. She wants to spend all of her time there. I don't think I'm alone in saying that the other world is a place I wanted to live, even if the place was run by the antagonist. The food of your dreams, endless entertainment, a lush garden, everything you could ever want. This, of course, makes it a perfect trap for a child, and is the Belldam's main trick to lure and capture children's souls. Abuse their deepest desires to be loved and then take their eyes. Coraline isn't swayed by this, however. She becomes more of a challenge to the Belldam than an easily manipulated kid. By the end of the movie, Coraline learns that her life in reality isn't really boring, and her parents are just really busy people who do love her a lot, even if they tend to push her aside. She eventually comes to learn this by what is possibly the most terrifying series of events, including other father turning into a disturbing pumpkin, the two lesbians wrapped in a candy wrapper, the demented circus, and the Belldam turning into a needle-based spider in an attempt to take Coraline by force. Even through all of that, she still perseveres and makes it out alive. But not before one last attempt to steal her away, with a stray needle hand and a firm chokehold by grabbing onto the key around her neck. This completes Coraline's arc, who at first was unaccepting of her boring life and parents and is now content with it. It took a living nightmare for her to come to that realization, but she has become an icon in not only film history, but in the minds of many a Gen Zer who has seen this film. There's other characters too worth analyzing briefly. The Beldam, whose motivations seem to be only out of a need to eat children in order to keep her alive and powerful. Somehow an omnipotent villain who can mold an entire alternate reality to her will depending on what a child deeply desires most, and who lives exclusively in the Pink Palace Apartments' crawl space. The actual parents of Coraline, Charlie and Melanie Jones.
Who cares? Let's talk about lesbians.
April Spink and Miriam Forcible are retired burlesque performers who are, yes, canonically a couple and are very gay. They are also surprisingly important characters in progressing the plot. They give foreboding advice to Coraline after reading her tea leaves, and they even make her a planchette out of old taffy for her that she uses in the other world to find lost and bad things. The two characters contradict each other, but they are both seemingly correct. Not the tea leaves thing. Forcible was doing crack in the darkroom, clearly, but with the candy planchette thing. It definitely finds lost things, but it also finds bad things technically. The bad thing is the world, which appears as gray in the middle of the planchette, and the lost thing is the eyes of the children. Otherwise, funny characters, definitely lovers. Let's go to Vladimir Putin. Sergei Alexander Bobinsky is a Russian circus performer who trains mice in his apartment to do circus stuff. He is not omniscient, but the mice he trains are. Mice are an important part of the film because they lead Coraline to the crawl space, and that's pretty much it. Moving on. Why Born Lovat, or if you're Coraline, Why Were You Born, is essentially Coraline's male counterpart. He gives Coraline some history about where she now lives, given that his grandmother used to live there and is the current landlord. Not much else about this character aside from him being made specifically for the movie adaptation and does not exist in the book. Finally, the cat. Everyone remembers the cat, right? Another omniscient character that is very aware of the existence of the Beldam and actually plays games with her because they hate each other. He helps Coraline from the middle of the movie to the end, and that's all the characters worth mentioning as of right now. Moving on. The main draw to Coraline is the stop-motion animation, use of color, weird designs of the characters, and the main vibe it gives off. No doubt about it, Coraline gives off a gothic vibe. The apartments, the color, the darkness of the film, it screams gothic. Not only that, but it's very mystical and uses a lot of fantastical elements to add onto the aesthetic. Especially the garden scene in the other world with live snapdragons and a rideable grasshopper and light up flowers and lush color. Even the concept of an entire other funhouse mirror version of our world where everything seems just a bit better is fantastical. Everything about it just feels cozy. Until it doesn't feel cozy, and instead feels scary. Insect imagery throughout the film, down to the furniture coming to life, the Beldam's terrifying final form, the color, fluidity, everything about it adds to the terror of the situation. All of this is thanks to the amazing crew behind the film, cinematographer Pete Kozaczyk, who just recently passed away, and director Henry Selick, who took over production design as well. All of these elements blend seamlessly to make this film the way it is.
Sorry, I just want to take a moment to briefly discuss how important the crew is to a movie. Without a crew, there is no movie. Everything that goes into a movie is because of a crew, and they deserve to be recognized. One of the main reasons Tar was one of my favorite movies of 2022 is because it put crew credits at the beginning, which is what I am going to do for all of my future films. Remember to watch through the credits and appreciate everyone's hard work on a film, because some of them were barely paid or weren't paid at all. Back to the video.
Although other stop-motion films existed at the time, like Corpse Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas, Wallace and Gromit, among many others, none seem to quite reach the aesthetic pleasure that is Coraline. It is seemingly separated from all of the others and singled out as the best for many. But what about the aesthetic has made it so special? I think it might have been a bit of right place at the right time, mixed with the current economical and sociological turmoil of 2009. Coraline came out just 2 months after the economy in the United States would crash, sending it into a deep recession that affected millions. It was a dark time to live through. I feel there may have been some sentimental feelings attached to Coraline, since it was reminiscent of a short time before the economy took a dive. Not like Wizard of Oz sentimental, where it took a full decade for people to fully appreciate it, but rather sentimental of the early to mid-aughts. A simpler time before the recession. When Coraline came out, it felt like a breath of fresh air, a break from the economic disaster, and a break from all of the darkness. 100 minutes of a fantasy world, a dream state the audience wished they would be in. For 100 minutes, everyone could just forget. Right place, at the right time. That's why it is as memorable as it is. Not just for its aesthetic, but also for its sentimental value to those who lived through that time period.
It's about time I talk about the plot of the film. My main goal for this segment is to discuss anything relating to the story and plot, maybe a theory here and there, and if the plot holds up today. If this film didn't exist and someone wanted to make it today, would it still be able to capture that lightning in a bottle?
The pacing of the film is great because it does enough exposition in the first 20 minutes to intrigue the audience without revealing everything at once. The entirety of Act 1 is exposition about the world of Coraline, the other world, the creepy doll, and how Coraline actually is able to enter the other world. After that, Act 2 builds upon that exposition, adding more depth and mystery without dragging on for so long that the audience falls asleep or stops paying attention. There's always something in the dialogue that reveals something about the other world and the Beldam, and always something happening. Also within Act 2 is the main climax of the film, when mostly everything is revealed and the Beldam takes its final shape in an attempt to steal Coraline. Act 3, the shortest act, happens after Coraline escapes the other world and after she throws the key down the well. It wraps up the film nicely with a pleasant yet unsettling end. The immaculate pacing of the film makes 100 minutes feel like half, even more so with its dreamlike descent into hell. This film also begs for multiple rewatches because there is definitely some exposition which at first made no sense, but then as the story continued to progress, began to make more sense. You pick up on a lot more things when you rewatch any film, but this film, after numerous rewatches, you can pick up on more of the lore surrounding the Beldam, the other world, and other strange going-ons at the apartment complex. Which brings us to the character of the Beldam. The first question that comes to mind when thinking about this character is, what the hell is this, and why does it exist? The Beldam is a seemingly omnipotent being that spies on children using dolls that look like them, and apparently lives in the apartment building which used to be a mansion with a crawl space that's all bricked up and apparently never spoken about with the renters? I know it doesn't exactly matter because it is bricked up, but wouldn't you think that a random door hidden behind wallpaper would at least be briefly discussed? I digress. Now, one theory that could explain why the Beldam exists is that it used to be a previous owner of the house, who died and is now haunting the building. Of course, this is negating a lot of details that explain the Beldam's behavior. Like, I'm sure whoever the Beldam was, they were possibly madly in love with their child and probably lost them, maybe mental health problems, abuse, really any myriad of reasons. But why that part of the building in specific? Is it a dream world completely disconnected from our own? We don't find out how any of it works, and that's kind of the point. It's fun to theorize about the mechanics of an omnipotent spider being trapped in the walls of a house, but the information purposefully left out of the film makes it fun to theorize about. Contrary to what screenwriters tell you, you don't need to explain every single facet of a story. It's okay to have secrets and mysteries that go unsolved. It builds intrigue and holds attention because you hope your questions get answered, but they don't. So you start answering them yourself with the knowledge given to you by the writers. That is the entire basis of theories. They are theoretical answers to questions raised by a piece of media that goes unanswered. Some people make careers out of that concept. It is engaging to come up with your own stories or theories as to how a fictional world works, and it makes the audience feel like a part of that world. This helped to create the following that Coraline has now. By intentionally and smartly avoiding discussing backstory and functionality, a dedicated following forms to try to solve that mystery. When it comes to community, it's beautiful. To the main question at hand, does this film hold up over 14 years later? I would personally say so. It's timeless, beautiful, impactful, and means a lot to many different people. An entire generation grew up with Coraline and look back on it fondly, especially nowadays as the world gets darker and darker. Are there some changes to be made? Yes, of course. No movie is free from sin after all. If this film was made today, the writers would have leaned into the queer overtones that Spink and Forcible give off, and I do think that is a worthy enough change to make to the film. There's no shame in canonizing a character's love for one another, and I think it would add a lot more to their character than just having the implication be there. A technical nitpick, I think this scene of Bobinski walking away could have been animated a little better. I've always noticed this as a kid, and it always annoyed me. Obviously, I can't nitpick the story too much because that involves diving into the book, and I don't want to do that here, but otherwise, Coraline is a very airtight film. The main theme of Coraline is that the grass isn't greener sometimes, and to be careful what you wish for. Although it is a very simple and frankly overdone theme, this film does a great job driving that point home, better than most who try to tackle familial war in peace. Coraline spends half the runtime wishing to have that perfect life on the other side of that wall, and the last half trying to get her old life back. There is a clear difference between true love and transactional love when it comes to how Coraline interacts with the two worlds. At first, she doesn't feel like her real family loves her, but then the other family comes into her life. She begins to love them, but only because they do so many great things for her. But when it comes time to sew the buttons, the toxicity becomes apparent. If you really love me, then you'll do this for me. Forcing Coraline to choose between her real family and this alternate reality. When her real parents are trapped in the other world, she has to fight to get that life back, because she really wants their love instead of the Beldame's fake and transactional love. This is part of the charm of the movie. It's pretty enough for children who aren't paying attention to say, wow, pretty film, but meaningful enough for adults to love the film as well. Now those kids have become the adults in this situation, so we look back on the film with so much meaning and love.
So after all of this, what impact did Coraline have, and why is it still important today? Coraline did not change Hollywood, not in the slightest. It was a small drop in a pool of big personalities and blockbusters. However, it proved that stop motion deserves a spot at the animation table. It is also a reminder that even though it is a kids movie at heart, it will not hold your hand and treat you like a toddler like so many kids movies do. Once again, this is a film that an entire generation grew up with, and has influenced so many things this generation does in life. Most people I know in this generation love Halloween, and the vibes Halloween give off. And I know damn well that was sparked by Coraline, because that's what sparked it for me. And because most of us grew up with this film, we feel nostalgic for it. Nostalgia does a lot of things to our perception of how we grew up, and it forces us to look at our past lives through a different lens. 15 years from now, we will probably look back at 2023 and we'll miss it. Just like how we missed 14 years ago, 2009, a much simpler time. Nostalgia can age a film like fine wine or milk, and Coraline is in the camp of aging like fine wine. It is a film that we look back upon and cherish, and makes you think about the past 14 years of your life and where it's gone. It makes me feel oddly sentimental for that life I used to live. I know this feels weirdly feelsy for a Halloween video, but Halloween isn't really about being scared and disturbed. Not to me, at least. Halloween is about pure childhood bliss. Looking back on my time trick-or-treating and waltzing around a neighborhood collecting candy like I'm a tax collector. Of course, it isn't just Coraline. A lot of media we consumed as young people influenced how we view and act in the world. Nightmare Before Christmas, Over the Garden Wall, Adventure Time, Billy and Mandy, and so many others. The media, films, cartoons, and pop culture of the mid-2000s to 2010s shaped our generation into the way it is today. I'm not just nostalgic for when I was a kid, but I'm also nostalgic for the innocence of being a kid. These films still make me feel that way, even after all these years. Anyway, I think I've said my piece. If I missed out on anything, drop it in the comments. I read all of them, not that there's much to read to begin with. I also want to thank a few people who were involved with the making of this video. My friend and fellow film major, Nick Mateo, who was behind the camera and helped out. My mom and dad, who have been nothing but supportive and actually helpful throughout. Love you guys. I want to also thank my partner and production designer and makeup artist, Andy, who has kept me sane during this production, making the sets, props, wardrobe, everything. Finally, you, the viewer. You've made it this far, you've seen the whole video, and I will be forever grateful for your support. Have a safe and happy Halloween.
I've been holding that in front of me.
Alright, cut that.